discusses his recently published biography of Nelson Rockefeller, which was a finalist in this year's National Book Awards. About Books, Saturday nights at 8 Eastern and Pacific Time, and Sundays at 9 Eastern and Pacific. Now Caspar Weinberger and his recently released book, The Next War. In it, the Defense Secretary under President Reagan assesses the American military and the international situation at the turn of the 21st century. Mr. Weinberger is currently chairman of Forbes magazine. He spoke at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C.
Well, everybody, if you take your seats, we'll get started. And we'll get started even if you don't. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the National Press Club and another NPC Morning Newsmaker. My name is Peter Hickman. I'm Vice Chairman of the club's Newsmaker Committee and a freelance writer and editorial and media consultant. If any of you sitting out here want to sit at the table, feel free. You're welcome to. Before introducing this morning's newsmaker, I want to call your attention to some material outside on the desk, which I think probably you already have, but there's also a list of upcoming speakers and events we have scheduled, some others, and we hope you would like to come to some of those too. Our newsmaker this morning, as you know, is the former Secretary of Defense and former Army private and former Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, the Honorable Caspar W. Weinberger. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Very glad to have you at the Press Club this morning. Caspar Weinberger is also a former California state legislator, a newspaper columnist, and a book reviewer and a television moderator. He chaired the California State Government Organization and Economy Commission, known as the Little Hoover Commission. And he was chairman of the Federal Trade Commission and also director of the Office of Management and Budget, which is where I think he got the name Cap the Knife, or was that the Pentagon, or both? Would be. He has headed several private corporations, was a member of the Trilateral Commission, and on the boards of certain religious, medical, and cultural organizations. And since May of 1993, he's been the chairman of Forbes, a bi-weekly business magazine, of which he had been publisher since 1989. Mr. Weinberger is here this morning to discuss with us his recent book, The Next War, which I think you have copies of, which he co-authored with Peter Schweitzer, and which contains a foreword by Lady Margaret Thatcher. The Next War is based on Mr. Weinberger's 7 years as U.S. Defense Secretary and addresses 5 potential international conflicts. In his book's introduction, he calls them, and I quote, literary war games developed in the spirit of Pentagon computerized scenarios. And he says that he and Peter Schweitzer hope to lay bare some possible and some unlikely threats we may face in the not-too-distant future. And he may also have some comments to say about the next Secretary of Defense and what whoever that may be, and what faces him or her. At any rate, after he talks, he'll take your questions, and we ask that you please identify yourself by name and organization when you ask them. And when you do have a question at any time during the news conference, if you'll give me a signal, I'll keep a list and call on you in turn, and as many of you as time permits. And finally, if you didn't sign in on your way in, please sign out on your way out. Thank you very much, Mr. Weinberger.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, very nice to see you and very nice to be back in the Press Club. And I thought what I'd do this morning would be have the bulk of the time for your questions, which I always find much more interesting than my speeches, and I would be glad to take as many of those as we have time for. The book primarily was written with Peter Schweitzer, who is an excellent author and who wrote a book called Victory a while back that properly assigns credit for the winning of the Cold War. And he has done a great deal of the work on it. But it is a book which I think was important for us to do, and we had basically this in mind. We had the fact that there seemed to be very little public awareness of the damage done to the military by the cuts that have occurred in the last few years, and very little public awareness of the fact that we have no defenses whatever against intercontinental or intermediate range missiles that can carry nuclear or biological or chemical warheads. The scenarios are purely fictional. They are not just hypothetical, but they are just statements of the kinds of situations that possibly could occur under very different circumstances than we have today. There's been some concern expressed to me by some officials of the Mexican government that one of the scenarios involves some problems with Mexico. That is not the same Mexico that we are dealing with today. The same is true with Japan. One of our closest and best allies is Japan. And what we're talking about in the book is a scenario that involves a totally different kind of government that takes over after numerous problems with our own trade policies here. So that these are not these are hypothetical situations. They shouldn't be judged as any kind of estimates of military actions that may be required in the future, unless the situation should change very, very drastically in many of the countries involved. People have asked me what is the most likely of the scenarios that might happen, and I have said that it seems to me the most likely one, again purely hypothetical, and again not in any sense an estimate or a prediction of what is to come, would be the scenario that involves North Korea, where North Korea, under a half-mad ruler, and again I say it's fictional, would feel that they had, on the basis of their years of economic privation, some incentives to attack South Korea, which in the book they do. They also persuade China that it would be a suitable time for them to attack Taiwan, which they have talked about, of course, many times in the past. The question then is, faced with these two major conflicts, what do we do about it? And basically the problem is that with our fences cut as deeply as they are, we would not be able to do very much without taking very considerable damage and without without a substantial delay before we're able to make any proper kind of response. The important thing here to bear in mind, I think, is the basic state of readiness that we have now. It's my feeling that if we had to do another operation similar to the Gulf War in a couple of years, if we continue on the path we're on now, that we simply wouldn't be able to do it. The force that won that war is gone, and we have an alliance that of some 31 nations that played an absolutely major role in that whole Gulf War, and that alliance is pretty well in tatters now, as we saw when, in an attempt to dissuade Saddam Hussein from further violations of the agreement that he made, we dropped a few cruise missiles in an area many hundreds of miles south of where he was violating his pledges. Nobody joined us, only Britain and Bahrain stayed with us and expressed support. And that's an example, I think, of how diplomacy can lose and essentially what a weak military and foreign policy can result in. The emphasis in the book many times is on how vulnerable we are and how much we are potentially subjected to nuclear blackmail. That is essentially part of the Russian scenario, because we have no defenses against these most terrible weapons, having voluntarily, by our own decision, stopped work on them 2 or 3 years ago, and talking now in an attempt, I think, to basically try to convince the people that we are doing something about it. We talk about theater defenses, which are important, but not in any sense the same as strategic defensive capabilities. And again, that is emphasized by the response that we could make, or what could we do in the event there is a threat of a nuclear attack, or even an initiation of a nuclear attack. And in the scenarios, as you'll see, there is very little that can be done except to try to pay the ransom. And that is a very unfortunate situation, obviously, for us to be in, but particularly when it's a situation of our own choosing by refusing to work on and continue the work on strategic defense that had been started in 1983 under President Reagan. The procurement curtailments, the sharp reduction in research and development funds, which were the things that helped produce the weapons that won the Gulf War with such very minimal losses to ourselves, are also detailed in the various scenarios. I would like to emphasize again that there is no significance in the sense that a particular country has been chosen as a as a subject of a scenario, because again, we're not talking about conditions that exist now. We're talking about conditions that could possibly exist. Henry Kissinger gave us a nice little statement in which he said that the book presents a chilling but plausible set of incidents, and that, I think, is essentially what we have tried to do. It is essential, I think, for American people to think about these things. We all recognize how basically difficult it is to get adequate military expenditures in a democracy. I suppose I'm one of the leading authorities on how unpopular and how difficult it is to do, but it has to be done. And I think we concluded finally that making speeches and writing articles wasn't going to do much good, that perhaps a book that pointed out, even though fictional, some of the things that possibly could happen after we'd reduced our military so sharply were things that would be capture some of the public's attention and bring home to us the importance of correcting some of these deficiencies while there's still time. I think anyone who trained in World War II and participated in World War II as I did will always be struck by the lack of preparedness that we entered that war, with which we entered that war, and that it's important that we not get into that again. But when you look at the state of the military budgets now, they are obviously being constructed not with the idea of military effectiveness, but with the idea of making budgetary savings. And when you look at the number of raids that occur on the Pentagon budget for non-military purposes, then you'll see that it's not surprising that we have reduced and lost a very substantial amount of the preparedness and readiness that we had just a few years ago. Obviously, we don't need the size of forces that we had to win the Gulf War, but the kinds of cuts that have been made, I think, have gone far beyond what is prudent in a world that is certainly not free from threat. And that was another of the purposes of the book, to point out the fact that there are still some potential threats from perennial problems such as Iran and Iraq, Libya, and North Korea. And that there are other kinds of threats that could arise in areas where there's a substantial amount of instability. And Russia is certainly a place where there is a substantial amount of instability. We have Mr. Yeltsin, who has done a very fine job in repudiating and rejecting communism, resigning from the Communist Party when few others would, and starting a whole new system without an agenda of world domination, such as the previous government had. And yet he is not a good candidate for the medical candidate for the kind of procedures he had to have. This is a country where the military has very poor morale. They've not been paid for months, many of those units, and they have about 25,000 nuclear warheads, which the administration feels are far safer because they've all been gathered into Russia from some of the outlying republics. Sadly, this doesn't make me feel much safer. And the administration's boasted, of course, that all of these missiles have been retargeted so that no longer are any of them targeted on children is relatively absurd, because the retargeting takes even an incompetent Russian technician something under 4 minutes to change back to the original targets. And I think that it's important that we realize how much of a threat we do face, even though we have a world that seems far safer than it was during the Cold War. So that basically was the purposes of the book. It was the purposes we had in mind in writing it, and I would be delighted to try to take questions now from you if you have any, or go into any more detail in anything that you'd like to have.
Thank
Yes.
you, Mr. Secretary. If you can give your name and affiliation, your first, your second, your third.
My name is Yolanda Gonzalez, and I work for the Mexican newspaper Reforma en el Norte. One of the problems you speak about in the chapter on Mexico is immigration. My question is, how bad do you think the problem is today, and do you think the military should do something about it?
Well, I don't think that the problem is very great today. There's obviously a lot of illegal immigration. I think the military's use should be very, very strictly curtailed in any kind of situation of that sort. I've never been one that felt that we should use the military to deal with the drug problem in the United States. There's some people who wanted to put the 2nd Division on the streets of New York when I was in the Pentagon to try and deal with the drug problem. That would violate all of our basic rules of civilian control and civilian separation of police functions in the military. But I think that there is a lot of illegal immigration, and the book poses a scenario in which, with very drastically changed conditions in Mexico and the assassination of a very fine, basically a pro-democratic president, the guerrilla-type chaos breaks out, and what effect that could have. But I don't think at the moment it's anything that is of unmanageable proportions, and I certainly don't think that there is a role for the military in drug interdiction, unless, of course, a particular country wants it. When I was in the Pentagon, we did send some forces down to Ecuador to help train, and Peru, at the request of those countries, and we also were giving some instruction with respect to planting different crops than those that produce drugs, all at the request of the countries involved.
Yes, sir, I think you're next.
Norm Sullivan, Greater Communications. Could you give your assessment of Colin Powell, George Mitchell, and Senator Lugar?
Well, Colin Powell is not eligible to be Secretary of Defense without an act of Congress. We have a rule that basically says you have to be out of the active service for 10 years. I qualified because I was out of the active service for 45 years, but he would require an act of Congress, and we did it once. General Marshall was given a special exemption from that act so that he could become Secretary of Defense under President Truman. But it's a very rare thing. Senator Lugar is a very, very fine, very able man. My worry about all of these appointments is that none of these people, no matter how good they are going to be able to be very good unless they have a president that will support them and will give them the kind of policies that will enable them to realize their full potential. And on the basis of the first 4 years, I'm afraid we don't have that kind of president, in my opinion.
I'm sorry, this gentleman over here.
Auto Pressure Copy News Service. Mr. Secretary, you repeatedly in your opening statement about ill preparedness and readiness of our forces. And yet General Shalley and the Joint Chiefs repeatedly say that this is the most ready, capable force that we've had in some time, and that that they are capable of performing the 2MRC strategy that is the basis of our.
That's the strategy that says that we need to be able to fight nearly simultaneously two major regional conflicts. I like to add to that, we need to be able to fight and win two major regional conflicts nearly simultaneously, and I don't believe that we're able to do that now. The General Accounting Office, which is certainly no friend of defense spending, in fact quite the contrary, said we're about $50 billion short of being able to do that, and I'm afraid that that's a conservative estimate.
Do you disagree that the forces are at a high state of readiness?
The forces were in a very high state of readiness, and were with a very high state of morale 4 years ago. I don't think that is the case now, and I'm sorry about it. I think it can be recovered and regained, but I think we have cut out a lot of the research and development we should have been doing. You don't go in and buy from the hardware stores the sort of things you need. You take about 7 years to develop them. I think we've cut back on procurement below what is wise, and on training time. We've reduced the size of the military. And for the first time in many, many years, the Marine Corps has not been able to meet its recruiting goals on a volunteer basis, which is a sort of a first indication of a reduction in morale, which was extraordinarily high 4 years ago and 6 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Eric Nordwall, UPI. Sir, how would you assess Secretary Perry's performance as Defense Secretary, and what do you think the President should be looking for in a replacement?
Well, I think Secretary Perry's a good man, and I think he's a very knowledgeable man. I have phrased it many times that I think he knows better. I think that he has been under a commander-in-chief who doesn't understand the military, doesn't know very much about it, basically doesn't like it, despite all of the protestations and the visits to bases now. I think that makes it very difficult for any Secretary of Defense to perform in a way that should be, particularly when the funds have been reduced so sharply, and when the military budget has been basically raided by so many other organizations and so many other purposes. So I think that it's very difficult for anyone to have performed in what I would consider to be a satisfactory way during that period. As far as the future is concerned, I really don't care what the name of the person is or whether he or she is a Republican or a Democrat. I think what we need is an advocate. We need strong advocacy. We need somebody who is willing to stand up to a president such as Mr. Clinton, who doesn't understand about the military, and tell him frankly what is needed, and tell the public what is needed, and to fight for it, and to fight for the military in every way that is essential. And I don't think we have had that. And I would very much hope that in the next 4 years, that would be the kind of person who would be a Secretary of Defense. Somebody who understands what we need, is willing to fight for it, and is willing to take the unpopularity that goes with fighting for military appropriations in a basically peacetime situation.
Could I follow up on that? Just a follow-up. Don't you think President Clinton on Monday, when he was speaking in Arlington, he sounded like he was looking for a stronger...
He sounded exactly that way, and that's my point. He sounds that way, and he doesn't do anything about it. When President Clinton stands at Arlington and talks about our having the strongest military in the world and we must keep that, that's fine, and I would love to see that followed up. But in the first 4 years, it was not, and I don't see any evidence that there's going to be any particular change. But you're right, he always sounds right.
Yes, sir.
My name is Nam Shin-ha from SBS in South Korea.
Right.
I have two questions about this book. In this book, you never emphasize the role of South Korean military against the North Korean invasion.
Oh,
do you have any special background against that? And
I think
the other
you'll
one is...
find on careful reading that there is a full appreciation of the role that South Korea played before and could and would play again. That certainly is our intention, and if that hasn't come through clearly enough, why in the second and third editions we would be glad to correct that.
What can you tell us? Of course, you have mentioned that this scenario is a pure fiction.
Yes,
But
yes.
What can you tell us about your assessment of real possibility of North Korean invasion into South Korea?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned, I think of the scenarios, all of which are fiction, it is perhaps the one that is most likely. And the reason basically is that the leadership is far from stable, to put it as kindly as I can, in North Korea. They have a large military. It is positioned very close to the DMZ. When I was in office 2 or 3 times, we were not able to tell with any degree of, to my satisfaction, whether North Korean activities were maneuvers or whether they were preparations for invasions. And that always leaves a kind of an ambiguous situation. The other point I think that's extremely important is that we have signed an agreement with North Korea, which to my mind is the worst appeasement agreement since Munich. And it is an agreement which, in return for North Korea's third promise, they've broken the first 2, and they're breaking this one now, that they would give up their nuclear weapons program, we have offered to supply them with 2 nuclear reactors. They wanted one new 250 megawatt reactor. We compromised and gave them 2,000 megawatt reactors. And these can produce plutonium no matter how many times the State Department insists they can. And plutonium is what you use for nuclear weapons, as everybody knows. So that when you have an appeasement agreement of that, when you couple it with a promise of free oil for a number of years, and you say you're going to build them a new power grid to handle all of this for them, that's bad enough. But what you give them is something that South Korea urgently wanted not given to them, and that is international recognition and respectability. And it means we've been dealing directly with North Korea instead of only through South Korea, which is what we should do. So when you couple that kind of an appeasement effort, and you have an aggressive nation that sees that it can be appeased and it will be appeased, then you have an increasingly dangerous situation, I think. And that is why I believe that of all of these fictional scenarios, that is the one that is perhaps the most plausible and also the most chilling, to quote Henry again.
This gentleman over here, you're next. I got you.
CBN News. Some have argued that the end of the Cold War has made it possible to do some of the downsizing in the military, and in conjunction with that, two-parter, what are the 2 or 3 biggest foreign policy mistakes by this administration, in your opinion?
How long do I have? Well, I think the North Korean agreement is a terrible foreign policy mistake. I think that our complete uncertainty from the very beginning. People are now writing quite frequently that the president learned a lot after the first few years and is now on track and is doing a good job. Well, that is not quite my opinion, but there's certainly, I have no question, quarrel with the statement that a lot of mistakes were made at the beginning. Secretary Christopher admitted that in an interview with the Washington Post the other day, in which he said, "We learned too late that the United States needs to assume a very active leadership role." The first statements that were made back in 1993, and this is one of the mistakes in response to your question, was that Mr. Christopher was sent around the world to find out what the Allies wanted to do about Bosnia and the former Yugoslavia. And predictably, the Allies didn't want to do anything about it. And we did not assume any leadership. If we'd done that with the Gulf War and sent around to ask what you'd like to do, we would now have a situation in which Saddam Hussein would be on his way through the kingdom of Saudi Arabia and down into the Gulf, I think. So that that was a mistake. We didn't assume any leadership. We allowed aggression to succeed. Another one was the agreement of Dayton, where we gave Serbia, the aggressor, what it wanted, which is a partitioned Bosnia, and one of the more absurd forms of government that has been yet proposed, with three Congresses, 3 presidents, 2 foreign policies, and 3 armies, all under different command. And it's something I think Rube Goldberg would have been rather ashamed to present had he been called upon to deal with that particular kind of situation. So I would count that as another major mistake. I think the downsizing of the military has been one, and certainly the stopping of strategic defense capability is a very big other mistake that has foreign policy implications. There are a large number of others, and we could go on for quite a long time, but those are the ones that strike me as being some of the principal mistakes. Primarily, a failure to understand that in view of the enormous resources that nature has given the United States and our position, we do have a responsibility to do far more than simply ask what others would like to do. We've also left, and this would be the last one I would want to mention in this particular response to your question, is that we have treated our allies and our alliances with no real understanding of the importance of those alliances. In Japan, we have constantly bashed them about various trading matters with no real recognition of the importance of the security alliance. I've mentioned about the way we've dealt with South Korea and North Korea, which I think is a major mistake. We treat our oldest ally and our closest ally with great scorn when Britain urgently asks us not to receive terrorists, and we invite Jerry Adams to the White House and give him international recognition, all in a vain attempt to stop some of the bombs being planted in London by his people. So that there's a large number of them. If in the last few months things have gone better, that's comforting. But I'm not sure that they have gone all that much better. And I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do very much better in the next term. As I say, if we get a different Secretary of State and he's given the kind of support and leadership that we haven't had yet, things could improve.
Jesus Esquivel from the Mexican News Agency, sir. Do you, with all my respect, you don't feel irresponsible from your part to write something about the hypothetically, and you mentioned at the same time it is pure fiction, but it could be probably be a real scenario, and especially when some Mexican officials, for example, says about the chapter on Mexico that who cares what you write, especially thinking about your background in the U.S. government?
No, I don't think it's irresponsible. I think that by a curious coincidence, and one that we didn't plan, the New York Times on Sunday had an editorial listing the potential trouble spots in the world, lead editorial, and it had a considerable amount of space devoted to the problems that could arise in Mexico. I don't think it's irresponsible. I think it's designed to show, and if you read the book, you'll see that the activities that the United States did in that Mexican scenario were designed to relieve the Mexican people of very major suffering caused by a guerrilla terrorist kind of activity that had taken over from the regular Mexican government after assassination. I think it's quite responsible to point out some of the things that might happen and some of the courses that could be taken to prevent those things happening.
Don, you want to follow up on this?
Gloria Esteves, del Financiero. Can you tell me what you see as the major problems of the Clinton administration foreign policy towards Mexico in handling all the different problems that you have?
I didn't hear the beginning. What, the major problem is what?
Yeah, you have been criticizing the Clinton administration foreign policy on North Korea, South Korea. So I wanted you to say, what do you see as the major flaws, problems of the Clinton administration foreign policy towards Mexico, specifically concerning security issues, like the different things that you have pointed out as potential problems for the United States. And my next question is that, or follow-up on the same question is, I have problems separating your hypothetical scenario from reality, because although you said it's hypothetical, on the other side you do mention real things that have happened in Mexico, like the appearance of guerrilla groups, the assassination of a presidential candidate. So in that respect, can you share some light on what's real and what's not real? And if you were Secretary of Defense, would you be proposing an invasion if the situation in Mexico would deteriorate to the extent you posted in the book?
I never answer hypothetical questions, and I can't imagine anything more hypothetical than my being Secretary of Defense again. But in any event, I don't think that there's any problem with using some of the real events in the past and identifying them clearly as real events when it is very clear that by doing that you're simply setting the stage and simply reminding people of things that might have happened in the past as you enter into what is clearly separable a hypothetical situation. I'm really concerned and surprised that anyone in Mexico has been distressed by what is in the book. I have great admiration and respect for the people in the country. I've been decorated by the Mexican government. I have visited there many, many times and expect to visit there again many times, I hope safely. And I don't think there's any problems that are in the book that indicate any kind of adverse feeling toward Mexico, or any feeling that there could be anything different than is listed in many other friendly countries that are mentioned in the book.
The invasion of Mexico, it's a very adverse feeling.
Well, it isn't an invasion of Mexico. I do suggest that it might be well if you did read the book. Troops were sent into Mexico to deal with a situation which was causing very great pain and suffering to the millions of Mexican people. In fact, driving them to come north. And that was the purpose of the action, and it was an action which not dissimilar, except in size, to what was done in Grenada. When we faced now you're horrified, aren't you, because of the comparison of the terms, but in Grenada we had a situation in which an anarchical government took over, and it was necessary for us to go in very briefly, about 10 days, to make sure that the people didn't suffer from this and weren't thrown in jail and weren't assassinated if they were seen on the streets after 10 o'clock. So these situations can develop. And what the purpose of the book is to make sure that the United States is ready for any kind of situation, no matter how improbable, and that's basically the basis of the war games. You don't say that it's irresponsible for the National Defense University or the military colleges to play war games, and yet that's essentially what this book is reporting on.
If it's not an invasion, what is it? I mean, to send in troops to Mexico.
It's an operation designed to improve the condition of the Mexican people at the request of many of them.
Don?
Mr. Secretary, Don for the Associated Press. I wonder if you could turn from your fictional scenarios to the world as you see it today, and give us some sense of what you think the likeliest problems are going to be for the administration, say, over the next year or two.
Well, I don't often do this, but I could refer you to the New York Times editorial of Sunday, which lists a lot of trouble spots in the world, many of which we covered in the book, oddly enough, without any collaboration, I hasten to add. I think that whenever you have a situation in which there is potential aggression, and I'm speaking, of course, of Libya, of Iran, of Iraq, you have things that need to be watched, and you have defenses that need to be prepared. When you have very large military organizations in countries that have a basic instability, And a lot of people are concerned about including China in that list. But my feeling is that China does have a potential instability in the sense that Deng Xiaoping can't last forever. And while people say he's very old and has no position now, he has a position actually in which he has still a major influence in the policies of the country. People in China will tell you that all the transition is arranged and there's not going to be any succession problems and so forth and so on. But the fact of the matter is that I don't think the transition is settled at all. And the fact of the matter also is that you have some extremely unfriendly and anti-Western statements being made by a few of the leadership who are there now. And when you couple that with the size and strength of their military, then you have to list that as a place where a problem could potentially arise. And that's why it's important for the military, as they do, to prepare for that with considering various scenarios and what our response could be. Russia is certainly in the same category because, again, the transition in Russia after Mr. Yeltsin goes, whenever that is, and we certainly hope it's not soon, we certainly hope that he does continue his very fine recovery that he's apparently embarked on now, but it's a very serious operation. I didn't know you could go beyond 4 heart resectionings, but apparently you can go to 5. And he will have a country which, as was demonstrated in the election which he won, in which there's a lot of opposition, in which Mr. Zhuganov, who calls himself an unreformed communist, got 40% of the vote, close to it. And then you have a certified lunatic like Zhirinovsky, whose goal is to take back Poland and Alaska. So you start to think about these things. When he got 20% of the vote previously, not so many this time. Third-party candidates, no matter how wild and irresponsible, do occasionally go down in their total vote. But you have a lot of potential there, coupled with the very large military and a very disaffected military, a military that has lost a great deal of the discipline that it had. As I said, they haven't been paid for months. They live in absolutely appalling conditions that we wouldn't allow to anyone in the United States, let alone anyone in the military, to get even close to. And so you have all of these possibilities, and these are areas of potential trouble. And you have to, obviously, that's the military's job, and if we're ever caught unprepared and unready for anything that happens, the military is properly criticized. So that's essentially, I think, where some of the real problems could occur. And the purpose of the book, again, was to try to point out the importance of increased readiness, increased preparedness, and particularly freeing ourselves from the threat of nuclear blackmail by trying to get some kind of defense, which we could do if we continue to work on it, against the threat of these most terrible of all weapons.
Excuse me, I'm David Marcus of the Boston Globe. Would you talk a little bit about what is the obligation of the United States in Zaire, a country where there is a humanitarian problem, but we don't have a strategic interest, or is there an obligation?
Well, it's a very close, tough question, and it's a good question. I'm glad you raised it, because we're right now at the point of considering what we should do there. We had a similar situation earlier in another African country, where we went in with a very noble and proper purpose to try to feed very hungry people and to try to get the food that the world was sending in to them, rather than having the warlords steal it and use it for military purposes. And we succeeded in that. But we stayed on, and we stayed on when the mission changed, some people say escalated, to change to something called nation building. Nobody knew quite what that was, but it involved killing American soldiers who were not prepared to be in that kind of a situation. I'd say parenthetically, here's a sort of footnote, that I can't think of anything more terrible to do to the military than to send them in as peacekeeping forces in areas where there is no peace. They're lightly armed, they have generally a pretty muddy, murky mission, and it's altogether a very bad thing to do with the military. As far as Zaire is concerned, obviously you have a centuries-old civil war going on. You have a lot of very hungry people. You have a lot of tragedies occurring every half hour. And I'm not sure what it is that an international mission could do. An international mission could not really settle a civil war without a very major military operation. And I think it is possible that we might be able to alleviate some of the suffering, or at least move some of the people to refugee camps elsewhere or something of that kind. I don't think there's any requirement that the United States participate in an international mission of that kind. I think that we have done our share many, many times with things of that sort, and I think there are plenty of other countries that could perform similar types of missions. I don't think it's a military situation, in other words. I think that a situation in the Gulf was quite different. We had national interests that were involved, two of them. One of them was not letting aggression succeed, where it is clear-cut and a very clear, obvious attempt by Saddam Hussein to steal a small neighbor. We have a great interest in preventing that and not letting that go unpunished. And when you let it go unpunished, as we did in Yugoslavia, then it succeeds, and it's encouraging people of like minds to do things elsewhere. But I think that the other interest, of course, in the Gulf was oil, and a lot of people say, well, it was just a fight over oil. Unfortunately, in the world in which we live, or fortunately, the world needs an enormous amount of oil, and to put all of that reserves, 90% of the world's known oil reserves in the Kuwait Kingdom and the Gulf, you'd have a situation no one could allow to continue to have those under Saddam Hussein's control. It's an individual decision in each case. In the press club some years ago, I tried to set out some criteria as to when it was proper for the United States troops to be used in overseas activities. And at the moment, I can't see that Zaire fits that, but there are certainly humanitarian interests that need to be addressed, and I think that we should encourage some other nations to help with that. But it's not at all clear what can be done in that kind of a situation, because it is an area of unparalleled viciousness, and a viciousness that has gone on for a very long time. But to be frank about it, does not appear to have the risk of spreading to other parts of the world, such as other kinds of conflicts in different areas could. It's not to say it's unimportant, but it's to say that it's one of the criteria used in measuring the need for United States intervention.
Yes, sir.
My name is Hiro Koike, Nikkei newspaper, Japanese Economic Daily.
Right.
Mr. Secretary, it seems to me that the people who knows well about Asia has left this administration and now is leaving, like Ezra Vogel and Joe Nye, and also Dr. Perry, who knows well about China, is now leaving. And I'm a little bit concerned about this because one of the problems of this administration handling the foreign policy towards Asia is that there's a lack of knowledge and lack of the experience, especially in the lack of the knowledge about Asian culture and so on. Would you have any comment? And
I'm afraid you're right. I think there is a far too little understanding and knowledge on the part of most Americans of many of the Asian countries. On behalf of Forbes, I went over just within 3 weeks to Malaysia and Indonesia before the election. It had nothing to do with the collection of campaign funds, but it was a trip that we make of the kind that we make regularly to Asian countries as well as European countries. We found that so many things there that the American people really don't know very much about or haven't any idea, and we found an awareness of that of the people in Indonesia and Malaysia, that there is a very little lack of understanding on the part of Americans of their cultures and their strengths and their importance to the United States and to the rest of the world. And I'm afraid that's true throughout Asia and perhaps to some extent throughout some other countries of the world. I think it stems from a very great fault in our educational system, which is our complete lack of emphasis on the study of foreign languages. If you study and master a foreign language, you are, I think, able to understand, and in the course of doing that, learn a great deal more about the culture and the society and the needs and the aims and the history of all of these countries, which are so enormously important. The other part of it is, I think, that America is not so much an isolationist country as a country which has comparatively little interest in what happens abroad because our own economy is large and because such a very small number of our people derive their income from foreign trade or activities involving foreign countries. Our companies now are expanding into trying to capture some portions of foreign markets as they have to do. I don't think we yet have a sufficient realization that it's a global economy and that anything that happens in Japan affects us immediately, and anything that happens here affects Japan, and if Mexico has a devaluation, it affects a great many people in Spain, and all the rest of it. It's all tied together. We don't understand that, I think, sufficiently, nor do we understand sufficiently all that we should know, to put it broadly, of other countries. And Asia is certainly, unfortunately, in that category. I think your criticism is absolutely correct.
Mr. Secretary, what would happen, U.S. bases in Japan, in the scenario year 2007 in Japan? Yeah, what would happen to the U.S. bases in Japan?
Well, I hope that I hope the scenario outlined in the book doesn't happen, and I don't think it need happen at all. But we have displayed, it seems to me, in following up and along the line of your last question, very considerable ignorance in our dealings with Japan in the last few years. We have not understood a lot of the sensitivities. We've not understood how effective we can be in having some of the things we want achieved if we will go about it by quiet, diplomatic, peaceful talks rather than holding press conferences and banging everybody over the head and saying how awful it is and all the rest. There are trade problems, there are trade differences. We have certain differences in our trade policies we wish Japan would follow. Japan undoubtedly wishes we would change some of our trade policies. But we haven't gone about it in the way that an ally should deal with an ally. And that, I think, is one of the difficulties. The book scenario poses a situation in which this builds to a crescendo, and there is an actual attempt to cut off trade completely with Japan, and knowing how dependent Japan is on foreign trade, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all things that the scenario is designed to try to show people what can happen if wrong policies are followed and continue to be followed. And if you couple that with military weakness and no defenses, et cetera, well, you can get an explosive situation. I would very much hope that we would continue to have, by the year 2007 and on, a very cordial and warm relationship with Japan, and that they would continue to be one of our closest allies and friends.
Yes, sir.
Shinji Yamasaki with the Japanese daily paper Akahata. You said that the current governments of Japan and Mexico are so far friendly to the United States.
Are what?
So far friendly to the United States.
I'd leave out so far. They are friendly.
Yeah. And my question is that, is it your idea that if unfriendly governments were established in allied countries, the United States should intervene anyway to change them into friendly one again? No,
that's far too hypothetical and far too improbable for me to deal with. What is needed is of course major efforts to keep friends, to recognize the importance of friendships and importance of alliances, which is another thing that I fault the administration for, and I do that because of the way they have treated some of our allies. And I have in mind Japan as one of them. I think it's important that we make every effort to keep these countries friendly and to keep a relationship that is warm and deep and enduring on both sides. And I think we need to devote a great deal of time and attention to that. And I hope that that's one of the things that happens in the current or next administration. Mr. Christopher is referred to as the most traveled Secretary of State. It's much more important to know what he does at the end of the trip when he gets off the plane, and I don't think it's been very effective.
Maribel Jesus Dario.
Mr. Weinberger, in the case that President Clinton nominates for the Pentagon somebody that really understands the military, what do you think that person should ask for? Do you think that person should place some conditions before accepting?
Well, it's normally a little hard to lay down a lot of conditions before you accept an appointment from a president, but I think that you need to have someone who understands things enough to know that essentially he has to have some freedom of action, and that he has to have the ability to call attention to the Congress and the American people to deficiencies that are there. Every once in a while, a military leader will tell a congressional committee that under sufficient prodding today. nothing much happens. But what we need is, as I said, is advocacy. We don't need any passive management. We don't need someone sitting by asking what it is the president would like to have done, or things of that kind. And that's difficult to find. And it may well mean that the person so chosen would have to resign after a few months because he wasn't able to achieve this kind of a relationship with the president. But I don't think that you lay down a lot of conditions before you accept it. I don't remember telling Mr. Reagan anything that I insisted on before I appointed him.
About the comfort level.
That is there.
So in another hypothetical situation, and taking the fact that you are an expert in Nicaragua, do you will support another Contras if talking about in the future if the Sandinistas took the power in Nicaragua?
Well, the Nicaragua had what I would consider to be a very successful election recently. I don't think.
In another hypothetical, situation.
Well, there are limits to the number of hypothetical situations you can have. We don't plan a second volume, but there are all kinds of problems that one can imagine. But I wouldn't want to go into any of them because I haven't studied them and would not be able to make any very useful comments about them. But at the moment, the relationship with Nicaragua seems to be very good. I think it's a little unusual that a man who loses 37 to 53 should talk about a recount. But in any event, it seems to me that the winning candidate down there means a continuation of a government which will be basically very helpful to the people there and to the world.
Dahlia, and then this gentleman down here.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, I would like to insist on my previous questions, which I feel you didn't answer. Can you just name one mistake or one criticism you have of the Clinton administration foreign policy towards Mexico? Like, for instance, some of the Republicans have suggested that NAFTA should have had some security aspects or something could have been conditioned on security aspects of NAFTA. I don't know if you feel that way, and I have a follow-up.
I think the administration supported NAFTA, was very welcome. I think it was delayed a long time. And I think it was coupled with a lot of attempts to placate labor unions by insisting on a lot of changes in labor conditions and so on. But basically the idea of NAFTA, I think, was a good thing. And I'm glad that it has been adopted, and I would like to see its principles extended to Chile and to other parts of the world. I'd be delighted to see a NAFTA agreement with Japan. And those are the things that I think would be most useful.
What can you criticize about
I already did. I told you that I thought the insistence on NAFTA before passing it, on a lot of labor conditions being attached, and a lot of changes in it, and leaving a lot of uncertainty as to whether we were going to be for it or against it till the end, constitutes a mistake that weakens the relationship. There are many others, but there are other questions too. You had about 12 now, and maybe we should have some others.
Yes, sir.
Secretary Leo Scanlon, Emirates Today. I have a question about the Gulf. And two parts. One is, can you comment on your perspective on unilateral trade actions such as embodied in the Helms-Burton bill and related legislation that has addressed Iran, Libya, and in particular the third-party boycott provisions of that as to what impact it has as a policy matter? And second, could you then develop a little bit about the intermediate or long-term perspective for U.S. troop presence in the Gulf, problems that might cause with our allies, how to deal with that, how to mitigate those problems, and what you would suggest as an overall approach?
Well, there's no question that another source of great concern to our allies is the Helms-Burton Act. And that, as you know, is designed for a perfectly plausible and worthwhile purpose, and that is to prevent people from profiting by using American property that had been illegally confiscated by other regimes even many years ago. The problem, of course, is that since some of the companies whose properties was illegally confiscated, that property has now been disposed of to companies that are in friendly countries, and they see it as an attempt to have an extraterritorial aspect to American law, and they're very unhappy with it. I think it is a problem which could very well have been mitigated if there had been adequate consultation with those countries and adequate procedures worked out to make sure that while the basic purpose of the amendment was carried out, we didn't do it in a way that involved no consultation, no discussion, no opportunities for changes or for agreements, et cetera, before simply announcing that it was in effect. And that again is one of the problems, I think, that causes so much in the way of difficulties with a lot of foreign countries, because a lot of the countries that are involved are very close allies. A lot of them are NATO countries, and I think it's essential that we, if we're going to do that kind of thing, and it's understandable why the Helms-Burton Amendment was conceived, then I think it has to be done with very careful preliminary consultation, and certain changes could very well have been made that exempted particular situations or any one of a number of things that would have mitigated a lot of the criticism. But when you just pass it and slap it on the desks of some of the foreign countries and say your companies are going to be boycotted or not given any kind of adequate recognition or treatment, then they naturally get unhappy about it.
And the effects in the Persian Gulf of the D'Amato-Gilman equivalent?
Well, again, you have in the Persian Gulf, we need allies. We need allies all over the world. We need allies in Eastern Europe, and I think it's a great mistake not to have admitted Poland and the Czech republics and Hungary to NATO when they asked for it 3 years ago. Not keep constantly delaying it and talking about 2001 and all that. But we need to have in mind the importance of having alliances and having the opportunity to work in various parts of the world. It's infinitely better for American interests if our troops can be forward deployed. But our troops can only be forward deployed if they're wanted. And whenever they're not wanted, we leave, as we did in the Philippines. And I think that was a great mistake for the Philippines and a great mistake for us. But it's what they wanted. By one vote of the Philippine Senate, the leases were not renewed, and we left. And that's what we would always do, I hope. But you can avoid a lot of those situations if you're far more careful about foreign policy and diplomacy than you have been than we have been in the past.
Any more questions?
Yes.
Yeah,
Going back to the Helms-Burton, what do you think about the U.S. Policy on Cuba? This has not worked for years.
Well, I don't think there's any policy that can work in Cuba until Mr. Castro is gone. I think that we should have, and I hope we would have again, not too distant future, a very friendly and warm relationship with Cuba. But Cuba is not a democracy at the moment. And it is virtually the only country in Latin America that isn't, actually. And I don't think there are going to be any changes there that would improve the situation until Mr. Castro leaves.
Yeah, but I mean, the policy that the U.S. has since 35 years ago is not working. Don't you think maybe something else could work better?
The policy of the United States is not to, simply to not have relationships with a country that does not have the kind of government that we would prefer. I don't know what changes we could make in that policy without compromising our position, and I don't know what changes we could make that Mr. Castro would accept or agree to or adhere to.
And what does it mean, for example, for you that the UN yesterday voted against the embargo? Almost everybody was against it.
Anything the UN does doesn't really surprise me.
My name is Kellyanne from Korean Broadcasting System. Last Korean War, which was broken out in 1950, took about 3 years to end up with a peace agreement. But according to your book, the next war will be ending in 2 months.
Next, I didn't hear the last part.
According to your book, the next war in Korea will be lasted about 2 months. Is there any significant reason you chose 2 months?
No, we're talking in the book about the kinds of military capabilities and the kinds of military results that you get from the new kinds of weapons and different kinds of situations that exist now that existed in 1950. There's no particular significance to it.
Mr. Secretary, why is it that in the book you put year 2003 for the invasion of Mexico? Is that because the Republicans will be in power by then?
If you'd rather have it 2002, we'll correct it in the next edition. I really don't know. It doesn't have any significance. It was in the future. It was a long way in the future.
No, I thought that maybe the Republicans would be in the White House by then.
Oh, well, they will be anyway. That doesn't make any difference. No, there's no significance to that. But it was supposed to demonstrate that it was someplace way in the future.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Secretary, thank you.
Sure. Even after all that, you still want to finish?
Of course. Maribel.
B-E-L, yeah.
B-E-L-L?
Yeah.
No E.
No.
Ay, me gusta que te lo dedique.
Claro. ¿Qué te crees? Thank you so much.
That's your pen.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
And I understood this is very good.
Yeah, it is very big. Well, why don't you ask the Mexican embassy?
Who does it go to?
I'm just.
USA John. Jenny Park. J-A-N-N-E.
You want to spell it?
USA John.
About Books airs Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern and Pacific Time, and Sundays at 9 Eastern and Pacific.